everyone. Those of you that can hear us in the hallway, we are beginning our first talk. Welcome to everybody to our Seniors Wellness Day. We have done this once before in the past, before COVID, and this is our second, can I say annual, even though it's not like the year after? Anyway, we're glad that you're here. We do have several speakers, but today, right now, in this moment, we are excited to have Cindy Bond here from the Alzheimer Society, and she's going to talk about, her title of her talk is Let's Talk About Dementia. So, warm welcome for Cindy. Thanks for being here, Cindy.
Thank you. Just give everyone a minute to come on in. You can hear me okay? If you can't, just do this. I've been told when you hold a microphone, you're supposed to act like it's an ice cream cone. So it's supposed to be closer, but we're getting feedback. So maybe not a really scrumptious ice cream cone. One that's going to melt. Is that okay? It's still getting a little tinging? Okay. Okay, testing. Oh, that's much better. Good? Thumbs up. How many of you know somebody living with dementia? Wow. So I want to applaud the people that don't know somebody, but give you fair warning that you probably will eventually. We're going to talk a little bit about statistics around dementia and why we need to talk about it. Okay. How many of you have heard me speak before? One. One groupie. I'm going to say you're my groupie, okay? You're my groupie? Okay. Awesome. I love conversation. Do not wait till I stop talking. If you have a question, don't wait for me to stop talking because I love to talk. That's why they gave me this job. So just yell it out, whatever your question is, or raise your hand like you were in school, get my attention, and I'll stop. Let's have a conversation about this. I'm not a teacher. Okay? So our topic is let's talk about dementia. So let's get on with it. Next slide. So land acknowledgement, especially today, right? That's okay. Are you all okay? You're awake now, right? Who needed coffee? Can we go back one? Thank you. So we are on Treaty 7 land. This is home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, Tsuut'ina First Nation, Stoney Nakoda Nation, comprised of Bearspaw, Chiniki, Goodstoney First Nation, Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And, of course, treaties were meant to create a shared home and a shared story. Next slide, please. So this is my personal land acknowledgement, because when talking to elders, they have shared with me that doing a land acknowledgement for generations, the Indigenous did this as a way of welcoming people onto their land and into their homes. So for me, this is where I spend a lot of my time, and so grateful for the land. So for those of you who are familiar with the Waiparis River, this is where I spend a lot of my time. This is my church, the Mountains of Waiparis. The next slide. And the horses in Nordegg. So just feel very blessed and honored to live here in Alberta. Next slide. So our mission and vision at Alzheimer Calgary is to lead with our influence and expertise to help people impacted with dementia to live well. How many of you think it's possible to live well with dementia? Ah, yay. Yes. So that's been part of our mission. One of the core things we do is provide education, and the reason for that is to reduce stigma. Because when people think, and we've done the research, and we've done surveys all over Calgary, people have said, yes, I think if I get dementia, I see end of life. And we go, oh my goodness, no, there's so many wonderful years in between a diagnosis and end of life. We all come with an expiration date, right? And it's up to us how we live between now and then. So we want to help people impacted by dementia to live well, and we build community capacity to support them because we can't do it all. At my table outside the door on the right, there is a handout, big stapled thick. Please grab one because it's about supporting our neighbors, because we can't do it all. We all want to age in place, or at least I do, and that's going to take each other to do that. So grab that handout on the way out. Our vision is an inclusive and caring community where people impacted by dementia are valued and empowered. So that empowered piece, advocacy, creating programs by talking to people living with dementia along with their care partners. Instead of thinking we're the experts, we want to talk to people with lived experience. Next slide, please. So I've incorporated a little funny. That's my B. I want to have some fun. Let's have some fun. This doesn't have to be totally serious. But today I want to talk about what is dementia and what is Alzheimer's, because that is a question I get asked all the time. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what are the common signs. We're going to talk about stigma. That's huge impact. Most people diagnosed with dementia say this is their number one concern, is the stigma. People start treating them differently. Friends stop coming over. It can be very isolating. I want to talk about the impact. Impact essentially on everyone connected to somebody living with dementia. So we know that for one person not diagnosed with dementia, 10 to 12 people are impacted by that dementia diagnosis. We also know, because we did a survey with Calgarians, that 50% of Calgarians are impacted directly by somebody living with dementia. That's staggering if you think about it. We want to talk about what is the difference between normal age-related memory loss and when to talk to your doctor. So I'm not diagnosing anyone. I'm just saying we're going to talk about some things that could mean something else, not necessarily dementia. And risk reduction. There are things we can do. Next slide, please. So what is dementia? It's an umbrella term for a set of symptoms, and we'll talk about those symptoms in a moment, but we know now, because there is no cure, scientists have really looked at how can we live well with dementia, as well as looking for a cure. They're still doing that, but there's lots of things that they found out, and it's not a normal part of aging. I don't know about you, but I'm of a certain age. I'm not telling you my age. But I'm of a certain age where I grew up, and it was called senility, and everybody got it, and it was just part of getting older. That's poppycock. Not true. Not true. We have a lot of people living 100 and longer that don't have dementia. Yet the biggest risk factor is age. Next slide. So what are those symptoms? So just by looking at that list, I'm hoping I'm reducing stigma, because when we hear the word Alzheimer's or dementia, we think memory loss. It's much more than memory loss. It's usually, again, this can happen with various types of dementias, but it happens at different times. Not all dementias are the same, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but short-term memory loss is usually what's impacted. So the last thing learned is the first thing lost. So grandchildren sometimes forgetting their names, forgetting a new route that you take, or the vacation you took last year, maybe, or what you had for breakfast. But those long-term memories hang on longer, much to the astonishment of a lot of care partners, because they say, oh my goodness, you remember in detail what we did for holidays 25 years ago and where we stayed and all the details, and I don't remember. Do I have dementia? But the memories like that. If you think about the layers of an onion, I'm very visual. I do a lot of those metaphors, but those outward layers of the recent memories and that core of the onion they stay there the longest. Impaired judgment and reasoning can happen as well. So leaving pots burning on the stove, getting in accidents, and the person living with dementia might say, there's nothing wrong with me, you're crazy. I'm a better driver than any Calgarian there is, which might be true. But lack of that insight, lack of judgment, and the reasoning part is really hard for caregivers. And I use caregivers and care partners interchangeably. Forgive me for that. But the reasoning. So, Dad, you know the doctor took your license away and you can't drive anymore because you were getting into accidents. Yeah, well, that doctor's crazy. There's nothing wrong with my driving. Come on, let's go, I'll show you. So that reasoning ability is difficult as well. Processing information, there's so many layers to that. Processing language, processing even visual things. So turn right at the next corner. Right, getting that mixed up and down. Visual information like shiny surfaces can look like water. Dark carpets can look like holes. Things like that. White sometimes is difficult to see and acknowledge as a solid. So if you think of the beautiful tapestry on the walls, for somebody living with dementia, that could look like it's floating. So something to think about. Most bathrooms are white. Yeah. Difficulty with activities of daily living. So hygiene, things like paying the bills, finances, difficulty managing finances can happen. Things like that can be a little trickier. Difficulty with communication. So primarily there's two: interpreting language and expressive language. So if I was living with dementia and you said to me, Cindy, would you like a cup of coffee? And I stare at you because there's something about what you said I don't understand. So that's interpreting language. If I look at you and say, I want the jug, the hot, exactly. But don't panic, because that's also being over 40. We'll talk about that. Losing words is part, yeah, that's what I call over 40 syndrome. We'll talk about that more. But it's so much so that it really interrupts sentence structure, communication on a regular basis. So it's not the one-offs, it's continuous. Changes in mood, behavior, and personality as well. And this is various degrees, right? But this is where care partners really know their person better than anyone. And they can say, yeah, you know, Joe was so easygoing, and now he gets frustrated over everything. Doesn't mean he has dementia, but it could be a sign, right? There's more to it than this. You have to have more than one or two of these domains for a diagnosis. Could be stress, it could be depression, could be a lot of things. Next slide. So why do we need to talk about this? Well, again, 50% of Calgarians know somebody and are directly impacted, but also over 500,000 Canadians are living with a diagnosis. Now, not to freak you out too badly, but those are only the ones that have been diagnosed. It's terrifying to me to think how many aren't because of stigma. Who wants a diagnosis of this, right? So delaying diagnosis happens quite frequently. Numbers are expected to double by 2030 and triple by 2050. Yeah. It's going to take a village. It's going to take all of us. The risk of dementia increases with age, and of course, I already said 10 to 12 people are impacted. Next slide, please. So what are dementia is that umbrella term for those set of symptoms we talked about. Alzheimer's is one type of dementia. Does that make sense? So if you say, I use the analogy, and bear with me, I'm very visual. Like I said, potato chips is the umbrella, and then you have salt and vinegar, and you have ketchup, and you have barbecue, and sour cream and onion. So those are the different kinds of dementias. We always say, and we're still called Alzheimer Calgary, but we work with people with all kinds of dementias. Alzheimer's, though, is the most common. So anywhere from 60 to 67% of people diagnosed with dementia, it's usually an Alzheimer's type of dementia. So we will see changes in memory. A lot of care partners will say, that's what I noticed first, is those changes in memory. But different types of dementias, memory comes much later. So it's progressive and non-reversible. It has plaques and tangles that actually kill the brain. So we say it's a brain disease. The only difference between that and a broken arm is you see a broken arm. You don't see this. It's a slow onset. So that's really important to know, because that's what makes Alzheimer's very different than the other types of dementias. It's a slow, if we were to graph it, it would be a gentle curve. Why is that important to know? Because if there's a quick and sudden change, something else is going on. Now, our risk of developing a mixed dementia happens over the age of 80. It's more likely to become a little bit convoluted as we get older. There's two types, late onset, which is over 65, and young onset, under 65. So the youngest I've personally seen in Calgary was a 30-year-old person with a diagnosis. So yeah, they're out there. We can't make those judgments. Common types, again, Alzheimer's is the most common. Then we have vascular, which is actually, again, if we were to look at it, is a stepwise progression. So I'm okay, and then I have a stroke or what we call a vascular event, and then I have a dip in cognition. Now, if you're very young and depending on the individual, you can come back up to your cognitive baseline. Brain plasticity, right? We've all heard of that. The older we are, the harder that going back to baseline is, but it's a stepwise progression. So you could level out. This is treatable, right? If you have cardiovascular comorbidities and they're treated successfully, you can limit stroke activity. However, as we age, we become more vulnerable to that. Then my personal favorite is dementia with Lewy bodies. So it says Parkinson's/Lewy body only because that's the way it's coming up in media. If you Google search it, there's a lot of confusion about the two. The reason, I shouldn't say this is my favorite, that doesn't sound right. It's fascinating. It's the most fascinating right now for researchers. They're finding out now that the longer somebody lives with dementia, the more likely they are going to have Lewy bodies, that's new and cutting edge. So it's called a Lewy body, but because of the person who founded it. But if you were to look at it under a microscope, it looks like a donut. And it's a protein buildup that damages the brain. So Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia are the same disease that impacts the brain differently, which is cutting edge. So it's another way of looking at it is what came first, the chicken or the egg? Parkinson's, you're going to see changes in mobility, changes in gait, perhaps a tremor. Those kind of Parkinsonian features happen first. Not everyone who has Parkinson's develops dementia. They're at risk, but not everyone does. With Lewy body dementia, there's changes often occur cognitively before the Parkinsonian features, so that the changes in gait, things like that. So, and the reason I'm doing this little deep dive is because it is complicated. People find it very frustrating to get a diagnosis, and I can tell you from working beside doctors that it's tough to figure out sometimes. And then we have frontal lobe dementia, which is frontal temporal lobe. So we see a lot of, there's two types. There's a behavioral variant and a language variant. So aphasia, difficulty with language, or changes in personality and behavior. My grandmother had frontal temporal, or suspected, because she was never diagnosed, because she was nasty. It was my job in the family to take her to doctor's appointments, and when I did, the doctor was on the 3rd floor, and we'd get in the elevator, and I would be like praying the whole way, like, please don't let anybody else be on the elevator, because it didn't matter who they were fat. You're fat. You know you're fat, right? You should be taking the stairs, you're so fat. They could have been this big around. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But she wasn't diagnosed. And I didn't know any better. I didn't work at the Alzheimer's Society at that time. I was just like, please, somebody else do this job for me. So that's a little bit about frontal lobe dementia. Any questions? So we're seeing more and more. There's over 100 different types of dementias, but these are the ones we see the most of, just so you know. Okay, yes? Yes, there's what I affectionately call a cheat sheet that has yes, and how to tell them apart. Yes. Yes. Yes, we're just at the tip of the boomers, right? So that as the boomers age, we're going to see an increase because the biggest risk factor is age, right? And those are projections, for sure. And then if you watch the news, Calgary is the hub for immigration right now. People from other countries are coming, and they're saying by don't quote me on this, I think 2027, we're going to have a million more Calgarians. So I don't know how that's going to impact our stats, but again, it's going to take a village regardless, right? It's going to take all of us. We're going to have to get to know our neighbors again. Okay, thank you. So when polled, and I can talk, so you let me know when I need to, I probably should speed it up. Okay. Self-stigma is a big indicator for delaying diagnosis. Early diagnosis is something we advocate for because you can have those conversations early. You can plan for the future early. We all need to ask hard questions of ourselves and those around us, our loved ones. If you couldn't live in your home, where would you want to live? So that's your homework today. Have that discussion. Think about that. If you couldn't live in your home, where would you want to live? What's important to you? Start those conversations. There is a delay in diagnosis, and often care partners are going, we didn't have that conversation. I don't know what their wishes are, and now I'm riddled with guilt because I have to make these very hard decisions, and I'm on my own. So have those conversations early. Next slide. How do we reduce stigma? And this is your other homework. You're all dementia ambassadors now that you've listened to me speak, right? So go forth and talk about dementia. Get the facts. Educate yourself like you are today. Be self-aware of your own biases. Watch our language. I know we like to make jokes. Like, Cindy, you have an education today. Oh, I hope you remember to get there. And I look at my husband and I say, that's not appropriate. That's not funny. But we do it. So watch what your language is around dementia. And be inclusive. No two people living with dementia are the same, regardless of the diagnosis. No two caregivers are the same. But we're all in this big boat together. So be inclusive. Don't assume you're going to say the wrong thing. And so what if you do? We're human, right? Next slide. So the impact for caregivers and the person diagnosed, those 10 to 12 people, are likely going to experience what's called ambiguous loss. So those are changes that happen that we witness, but there's no closure. It's a death, but there's no closure. So it's actually a phrase, ambiguous loss, when men came back from war. Their wives said, that looks like my husband, but that's not my husband. So care partners see the nuances of a person changing, and it's hard to explain. My grandmother, I would comb her hair. That was our thing. She loved me when I did that. I wasn't fat when I did that. But as her dementia progressed, she didn't want me near her. And that hurt my heart. Now, some of you understand that, but my family didn't. Well, we'll get over it. So what? Now you got one less thing to do, right? So it's very individual. A lot of grief. A lot of grief. Changes in relationship and emotional distress. Changes with friends. Like I said, friends typically drop off because they don't know what to say. They don't know how to help. Financial impact, especially young onset. Or if you're considering a move into a care home, there's financial impact to that. Loss in supportive companionship. Like if you think of as a couple, what do you share? You know, in my house, we have blue chores and we have pink chores. But if my husband ended up with dementia, I'd have to do both or get help. And there's a financial impact, right? Decline of physical and mental health. 50% of care partners end up in hospital. That's staggering. Loss of sleep, work life, and you can see a lot of guilt, a lot of guilt. And care partners, their focus becomes being a care partner because it takes so much time, right? So it's balance. We talk about balance for both. Next slide. Treatable factors, this is for all of us. So these things are treatable and will impact our cognition. Malnutrition and dehydration. So for those living on their own, it's easier to eat a box of crackers than it is to prepare a big meal. So there's a lot of malnutrition in community. Vitamin B12 deficiency, so if you didn't know this already, you need to be talking to your doctor about this blood work and saying, what are my levels? They're okay. Well, okay is not good enough. Medication interactions can look like dementia, right? If it's impacting your sleep or, just medication in general. Be aware of side effects. Fatigue. None of us think and make proper decisions if we're tired. Stress and depression. And thyroid malfunction. So getting that checked as well. Next slide. So, what's normal versus unusual? So if you're identifying with under the unusual, don't panic. It could be a lot of different things. So you don't need a diagnosis to reach out to Alzheimer Calgary, and we never assume it's dementia. That's a doctor's job. But these are things to keep on your radar. So occasional memory lapses is totally normal as we age. Usually, though, it comes back to us at some point. You know, that happens to me all the time. 2 o'clock in the morning, I'll sit up in bed and go, the actor was this. Yeah, that's a good sign. Or if I lose my keys, if I sit down and relax, sometimes I can figure out where I left them, right? But if I get anxious, forget it. It's going to take longer. If you're worried about your memory, that's a good sign because you have insight. You don't get lost in familiar places. Now, Calgary's a bit of a game changer because we're under construction, so be kind to yourself there. Occasional difficulty finding the right word. Thank you. Yes, absolutely, but we can carry on a conversation. Judgment and decision-making ability usually remains the same. However, I have this argument with my children that I tend to say I'm more abrupt now. I have less time. I tell my children, I have less life left to fool around and beat around the bush. So you're an idiot. I'm not gonna, yeah. So again, be kind to yourself. Unusual difficulty performing tasks that you typically would do. So if you're not good at finances, why would that change, right? Lack of insight. So people around you are saying, oh, like, have you noticed memory changes for yourself? And you go, really? No, I haven't. So it doesn't mean you have dementia, but something else could be going on, okay? Getting lost or disorientated. So that doesn't mean leaving here and going, oh, where did I park? Because that's normal, right? We'll all be with our fobs listening. Oh yeah, I'm over here. That's normal. Forgetting you drove here would indicates that's unusual. Words are frequently forgotten, misused, or even garbled. So mumbling happens. My father-in-law was like that a lot. That he couldn't form a sentence, so he mumbled. And repeat stories in the same conversation. So be careful, because I went down this rabbit hole. My mother-in-law lives in Ontario, and I call her, and she has been assessed, because I said to the family, I don't know, not saying she has dementia, don't know, but let's get some cognitive testing, because she's repeating herself. And what she was doing was she didn't want me to hang up the phone because she's lonesome. And she would run out of things to say. It's nuts. Yeah, so we're going back to Ontario. That'll be my next trip. But, right, it's not easy to discern, right? Trouble making choices may show poor judgment and behave socially inappropriate ways. So I had a lady who called and said, Cindy, I listened to your talk, and little background, I traveled the world my whole entire life, and now I'm packing to go to Arizona, and I don't know what to pack. And it's terrifying me. So, like, let's talk about that. Like, well, what else is happening in your life? And a long, lengthy conversation. She was going to hang up and make an appointment with her doctor. She never called me back, but that was a total change for her. She's like, this is very unusual for me. So it's those unusual moments. Next slide. Really quick. Okay, I'm not going to go through this, but I want to talk to you about this at my table because I have this handout. So let's talk about that a little bit further. Next slide. And we've launched a website. It's called Still Me. And it's fun, and it's full of inspiring stories of people living with dementia. So check that out. So this is the kind of new branding. If I'm stuck on repeat when we talk, it's probably not a TikTok trend. It's looking at it differently. It's lightening it up a little bit and letting people live well with dementia. Next slide. If I act a little odd, I'm not trying to get back at you for refuse to eat your vegetables. It's a brain disease, right? And this is from people that have a diagnosis. They've said these things. Next slide. So our services at Alzheimer Calgary, you can connect with us through email, phone calls. I always recommend don't drop in. Make an appointment, give us a call, but we're open during Monday through Friday. We have education, webinars. That's usually where I am if I'm not in community. And everything's free, so please join us. As the weather gets colder, we're going to be going into Zoom a little bit more, but I'm doing talks in Canmore, Cochrane. I'm all over the place. Hopefully Didsbury, Strathmore in the spring. We have 2 adult day programs in community. That's our website, our phone number, and I have all this in a pamphlet form on my table. And you can follow us. And we have a support group on Facebook that's open to anyone. So feel free to join that. And last slide, just a quick shout out to our sponsors, which is United Way and Alberta Retired Teachers Charitable Foundation. Any teachers? Retired teachers? No? I want to thank you. It's because of you I'm standing here today. And that's all I have, but if you have any questions, I would love to chat with you further. My table's right outside the door. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Cindy. So yeah, visit her table. Do some other browsing in the other through the other booths that are out there. We are our next speaker is at 11 o'clock. Tara Hanks from Chartwell talking about planning your senior living journey. So all sorts of information there. So browse, do what you need to do. Come back at 11. We do have lunch coming at noon if you're